I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about cultivating herbs. I'm Wind, Clearwater. I've been studying cultivation of medicinal plants and permaculture for about 25 years. And I don't consider myself an herbalist, but I'm a horticulturalist who likes to grow medicinal plants. So I specialize in growing medicinal plants. But I do a lot of herbal stuff, but to be an herbalist is a totally different deal. I would never take that claim. So I'm curious if any of you here have actually grown any medicinal plants at all? Anybody? Yeah, Jen? Oh, okay, cool. And so I'm assuming that you guys want to grow more medicinal plants? Okay, cool. All right, so let's just do a little quick overview. This might be a little redundant for some of you, but so plants come in many different classifications, and basically what we're looking at is annuals, biennials, perennials, vines and brambles, shrubs and trees, okay? And medicinal herbs are in all those different classifications. And so when we're coming from a permaculture perspective of growing these things, first thing we want to do is observe the area that we want to create our garden space in. It's the primary thing. And I can't stress that enough, how fundamental and how much that has to be a continuing process throughout your gardening experience. Because things are always changing in your garden, because plants are dynamic and they grow and they die and they change over the season and over the years, and they will change the environment that you're working with as well. So it's important that we're constantly observing it and receiving the feedback from our gardens, and also adjusting how we handle our gardens based on the feedback that we receive. So some of the, I like to focus on the perennials when it comes to medicinal plants, because they are long-lived generally. They're easier to grow than a lot of the annuals, especially in our climate. And there's a lot of medicinals that you can grow in the perennial category. And for most of us, we've got the space to do that. For some people, they've got larger areas and they can grow some of the trees and some of the shrubs. But for most of us, we've got the space where we can actually do the perennial gardening. So when you're observing your space and trying to decide where you're going to grow things, the first thing we want to do is we want to notice what are, in permaculture, we call the sectors. We do a sector analysis. So these are the incoming influences that are on our property. So I like to start with the 4 elements. So we look at the sun, we look at how the air moves through our property, we look at the water flow, whether that be a ditch, a river, or roof water that's coming off of our roofs and through the gutters or just on a drip line. And we also want to look at the earth itself and how the topography is. We want to identify the different climates and microclimates that are occurring. One piece of property can have many different environments happening. We can have shady, cool sides that stay damp. We can have sunny, hot sides that stay dry, and any combination in between there. Some spots get sunny in the morning and shady in the afternoon. And we have to understand how that sun affects the earth, how the water affects the earth there, and also how it affects the soil, because the soil is the foundation of our gardens. And if we're growing medicinal plants, and we're doing this for health, because that's what medicinal plants are for, we have to have healthy soil so we can have healthy plants. Because the soil is what feeds the plants. It's not us. So we have to feed the soil. That's actually our job. And so does anybody know how we feed the soil? Pat knows.
Lots of stuff from her.
Compost. Compost is how we feed the soil. And that's really it as far as I'm concerned. I'm not a big fertilizer guy. I do fertilizer in my nursery because I'm growing container plants. And so after they've used up the little bit of nutrients that are in those pots, they're basically hydroponic at that point. So I have to add food to the water when I water them in order to keep them healthy. But when we're dealing with the earth and we're working in a garden space, we actually have soil, and the soil is a living organism. So We need to feed that soil, and we do that by composting. And we compost gently over long periods of time, because just like ourselves, we don't want to gorge ourselves and then go without food for a month. So we eat continually. Okay, so we've already looked at those natural sectors that are happening. And we also can look at some of the other sectors that happen. Noise. We can look at people and how they flow through our property. We can look at dust that comes in. We can look at maybe sound from our neighbors if we live in town. How do we want to create this holding space for our sacred garden? Because if we're growing food and we're growing medicine, to me, that's a sacred act. And so creating a container for that is really important. And it also lets our plants know that we care about them, because we don't just stick things out here in the middle of the desert somewhere where it's just going to get blown by the wind and baked by the sun. We want to create a safe, healthy environment. And so the best way to do that, and today's a great example because it's really windy and we're in an exposed spot. And before Pat was here and planted all this was raw land and probably some pasture, but they planted all this. So the shrubs and the trees are really good pioneer plants to get started with to create that environment. So do you guys know any medicinal plants that are in the shrub classification? Elderberry is always the first one. Everybody knows the elderberry. We just love elderberries. Which ones?
Hawthorn?
Hawthorn is another great one. Hawthorns form both thickets and also trees, and elders are the same way. You can create an elder into a shrub by the way you prune it, or also into a tree if you want to take up the under branches and let it grow up into a multi-stemmed canopy. Okay.
Is rosehip considered a shrub?
Roses are definitely shrubs, yes, and that's another great one, and a great one for this environment. The Rosa rugosa is the big shrub type that we see growing around, and they have really big hips. The Rosa woodsii is kind of a smaller one that grows more along the rivers, and you see that kind of actually more in a shady environment. It doesn't have quite the big shrub growth that you see on this one over here. That one right outside is the rugosa. So that's a really nice big shrub. That one right there is a Nanking cherry, which is in the rose family. It's related to all of our prunes and plums and cherries and apricots and all that stuff. Great edible, excellent hedgerow plant. So when we talk about medicinal plants, I like to include foods because food is medicine. And if we eat good food, then we stay healthy. And so in a way, it's a prophylactic medicinal, right? Because we won't necessarily need a whole lot of medicinal plants if we just stay healthy and strong. And we do that by eating, to me, eating foods that we're cultivating or eating wild foods. That's the best way, because they're the most closely to the environment that we're in, okay? So let me just go back for a second, because I want to just bring to your attention the different ways that we can actually get herbs. Okay, so we're going to grow medicines. There's 3 basic ways that I think of how we can get herbs. We can wildcraft, and each one of these has its own set of advantages and disadvantages. And with wildcrafting, you've got the advantage of not having to cultivate it. And also that the plant is going to be probably at its most highest potency because it's growing in its natural environment. The challenge with wildcrafting is that you've got to know when to go get those things. So if you're trying to wildcraft arnica, for example, first off, you've got to know where arnica is growing. And secondly, you got to get there when those buds are just about to open so that you can get the flowers at the peak of their potency. Okay? Certain other plants like Osha is a little bit easier because you just wait till fall when it's gone dormant and then you can dig the roots. But nonetheless, you still have to go find the Osha and know where it is and dig it out, right? So there's some advantages and disadvantages of both of those. The next one would be to get the herbs from someone else. You can buy the herbs. There's plenty of online herb stores and places you can get herbs, even locally. Again, there's an advantage there. It's readily available and you have a wide selection, but you also, maybe a disadvantage is you don't know where those herbs come from. A lot of companies buy herbs from China or India or Africa or South America, and you just don't know the quality, how long those herbs have been off the plant, how long they've been sitting in a plastic bag in some warehouse somewhere waiting to get shipped, especially if it's something that's not a super popular herb that you're looking for. It could have been sitting around for years. So it's really hard to determine the potency of that. So to me, the best way to get the herbs you want is to grow your own. And there's a lot of reasons for that. And for one, I feel that when you grow an herb yourself, that herb knows you and you know it. And there's a symbiosis that happens. You're giving it life, it's giving you life. And in that kind of a relationship, just like any relationship that you have in your life with any plant or other human or other animal, you create a bond that can't be created from something you've wildcrafted or something that you've bought from someone else. Especially if you start things from seed and you get an opportunity to actually watch how that plant grows. You understand it on a deeper level, and therefore your body inherently understands it on a deeper level, and it can receive the blessing and the power and the strength and the medicine from that plant in a way that it can't really from something that you've bought that was cultivated on a farm somewhere in China. It's just the way it is. And you can also have a better selection of the herbs that you want. With wildcrafting, you can't wildcraft echinacea here. But if you want echinacea, you're going to have to grow that yourself or buy it from someone else, okay? The trick about cultivating is that you've got to cultivate it. You've got to be there. That might seem like a drawback, might seem like an advantage to some people, but it takes work. And some of the herbs that you might want are not easy to grow. You want arnica, it's not an easy plant to grow. It can be grown, and once it gets established, it grows pretty vigorously, but it takes time to get it to go. I have a nice patch of arnica in my garden. It took me 5 years to even get the arnica germinated and strong enough that I could even get it into my garden. And now it's 3 years old and it's beautiful and spreading, and it's got flower buds all over it and ready to go. And that will probably be the most potent arnica that I could ever get. I could harvest it in the mountains, but because I started it from seed and I held it in a tender way for years and encouraged it, it's going to give back to me because it has a consciousness of its own, right? And I mean, you guys all, I don't need to tell you that, but plants, there's an intelligence there. There's a consciousness with them. That's why we're in this class, right? That's what we're doing. Okay, so I would encourage you to do your own cultivation, and I would encourage you to start with some of the easier herbs, some of the things that I consider to be some of the basic plants that probably pretty much, again, my opinion, everyone should be growing in their gardens. Echinacea to me is a no-brainer. Comfrey is another one that's really simple, easy to grow. Once you have it established, you really never have to do anything. You barely even have to water it. The roots of comfrey will go down 10 feet into the ground. So once it's established, it is the most drought tolerant plant in your garden. And you know, you can just harvest from it. You can even harvest the roots and it'll come right back the next year, okay? So back to design. We've looked at our yard or our piece of land, and we've identified the sunny spots, the shady spots. Now what we have to do is we've got to look at ourselves and observe in ourselves what do we have in us to grow? What do we want to grow? What kind of energy do we have to do growing? So, and then do we want to buy plants? Do we want to start from seed? Do we want to grow hedgerows? Do we want to grow just herbs that are perennial? Do we want to grow annuals? And so once we've observed the outer landscape and then we observe the inner landscape, we can marry those two things together. We have to look at both our land and determine what are the right environments for the plants that we want to grow. And then we also have to decide what these plants want, okay? And what do we get from the plants? If we're growing marshmallow, for example, which is a plant that we're going to harvest the root, we're not going to necessarily want to plant that right next to our hedgerow or right next to a tree, because it's going to be difficult to get in there in years to come to harvest the roots from that perennial, because the tree roots are going to grow all around it, right? So this is where we sit and create a site plan and begin to do some overlays with some trace paper and start to plug things in. And you've got to be able to look ahead a little bit too and see that that linden tree that I just planted that's 4 feet tall will someday be 30 feet tall. And how's that going to change the environment? Because the linden is a very dynamic plant. When you're talking about echinacea, it's the kind of plant that's going to go into the ground and it's going to reach its mature height in a couple of years, and it's always going to be that height. It's going to spread this way, but we can keep it cut back a little bit. So it's a little bit more of a static plant versus a tree or a shrub, which are going to create these big canopies, shadier environments, and they're also going to encourage different soil microbials. And this is a really important part of permaculture and forest garden design, is incorporating all these different types of plants, the annuals, perennials, trees, and shrubs, into the same area, generally speaking. We don't necessarily want them all on top of each other, but we want them within the proximity of one another, because by doing that, we're creating diversity in the above ground landscape, and we're also creating diversity in the below ground landscape by encouraging different types of soil microbials, and also encouraging different types of organic matter that's going to fall down on the top. Because the leaves from a cottonwood tree are going to be a lot thicker and take a lot longer to break down than the herbaceousness of a comfrey plant, which is going to fall apart a lot easier. So you've got something that's more readily available for your microbials in the soil. Okay? Is everybody following this? Questions? Okay. So I like to start with the shrubs and the trees because they tend to be the anchor plants in the landscape. And if you've got a super windy site like this one here, starting with a hedgerow is a good idea, because a hedgerow helps to block the wind and create that safe container to put these other plants that are probably a little bit more tender. So you start with your hedgerow, you select out which shrubs you want. You could go hawthorn, we've got elderberries, right? Do you guys know cramp bark? Okay, that's nannyberry, viburnum lentago.
You're talking about hedgerows now.
This is hedgerow, these are shrubs. These are tall type shrubs that you would use.
Wait, what was it you just said? The plant.
Cramp bark,
What?
cramp bark,
Bark for cramp.
or nannyberry is another name for it. I prefer Latin because then you can look it up, viburnum lentago. So if you do that, then you'll know, because a lot of herbs have many names, and that gets confusing, right? Even comfrey is knitbone, or not boneset. Boneset's another one. You guys know boneset? Eupatorium purpureum? You don't know that one? Okay. So there's a lot of different, so that's why we if you can learn the Latin names, to be honest, it's not necessary, but if you really want to get into herbalism, it really, really helps a lot. Okay, so some other shrubs. Goji is a great one. That's a very potent medicinal herb in Chinese, traditional Chinese medicine. So TCM is very different than Western medicine. There's a lot of alchemy that happens in TCM. You'll get something, you go to a Chinese medicinal practitioner and they'll give you a little paper bag full of 15 nasty smelling mushrooms and roots and bark and crap that you're supposed to boil 3 times and drink over the course of a whole day, and you've got to gag the thing down because it tastes so terrible. And of course, Western medicine and Western herbal medicine, we like the honey. We want the stevia. Give us the sweet, and you put 1 or 2 or 3 things in there, which is totally fine. It's a different approach, right? But we don't generally see a lot of really complex mixtures in Western herbal medicine, and that's probably because it's newer. It's more recently developed. It's based on ancient ideas and ancient knowledge, but it's still, the practice of Western herbal medicine is only a few hundred years old versus Chinese, which is 4,000 years old, you know, so they've got this sense of that. So the herbs that are in traditional Chinese medicine are very different. Some of them cross over though. Angelica, astragalus, licorice root, things like that. There's a crossover there. But even in traditional Chinese medicine, you use the Glycyrrhiza uraleensis, whereas here we use the Glycyrrhiza glabra. They're the same genus, but they're different plants, okay? And as a side note, they both do really well here. As a matter of fact, I have a beautiful stand, it's probably 8 years old, of Glycyrrhiza glabra growing in my garden, and it's like 6 feet tall. It's beautiful, it gets little purple flowers on it. It's a nitrogen fixer. You guys probably all know what nitrogen fixers are, right? So it's in the legume family. So it's a great plant, and when we're doing permaculture, because I'm always going to go back to permaculture because that's my jam. When we're doing permaculture, we want plants that have multi-uses, many different uses. You can eat the little pea pods on any pea plant. So this Siberian pea shrub with the yellow flowers on it, it's edible technically, good animal forage. Chickens love it, nitrogen fixer. Same with the astragalus, and same with the licorice root. They're both nitrogen fixers. You can feed the seeds to your animals, or you can eat them yourself, okay? And they're also medicinal. Witch hazel is another hedgerow shrub that we could use, which forms a small tree, but you can prune it into a hedge. And let's see, roses, we already mentioned, that's another good one, okay? And so with elderberries, I don't know if you guys know this, but with elders, you need several different types of elder in order to actually get good fruit production on that. If you're only growing for flowers, it's okay. But if you really want to get good elderberries, then you probably want to do several different kinds. And there's 3 basic species of elderberries. There's red, black elder, and white elders. And white elders are native to Australia, and I have never seen them in this country at all. So, but black elder is what most people want to grow because they're slightly less toxic than the red elders. All elderberries are toxic, but that doesn't mean that they're not medicinal. A lot of medicines are toxic, but the red definitely has a little bit more of toxicity to it. So with the red, you want to make sure you cook those if you're going to use them. So Sambucus racemos, or pubens, is the native red-berried elder here that you can see growing all up in the West Elks. You can harvest those. But if you want to cultivate, you probably want to do the Sambucus nigra, and you want to get several different varieties, the canadensis and the cerulean, or just the straight black elder. There's lots of different kinds of black elders. They're beautiful, absolutely stunning plants. Okay, so you've got your shrubs going, and you've also got a few trees. Does anybody know any medicinal plant trees that would grow around here? What is it? Linden, that's a great one, absolutely. Linden, all parts of that are medicinal. Great plant.
Siberian elm.
The elm is a good one, yep. And all the elms have that slippery elm type of bark to them, but the slippery elm, which will grow here, not easy to grow here, but it will grow here, is the true medicinal of all the elms, okay?
I have so many elms and seeds right now in my yard.
Yeah,
Insane.
it's a weed.
And they all just grow trees everywhere.
Yeah, it's a total weed. But, you know, around here, like, it's hard to turn your nose up at a tree. You know what I mean? If a tree grows and you don't have to do anything for it, doggone it, just let it grow. That's what my attitude is. You know, we need all the shade we can get. Because these trees are going to create nice shady microclimates. You know, if we're going to grow some of these medicinal plants, a lot of the perennial herbs are understory plants, and they want at least some partial shade. In my garden, I have a big cottonwood growing right in the center of the garden, and it works like a sundial, and the shade moves around the garden like this, you know, over the day. So everybody gets a little bit of shade. So I have to observe and go, okay, well, who wants the morning sun but doesn't want the evening sun? So my arnica gets morning sun, but the afternoon sun, when it's 95 degrees in July, it's in the shade. Has to be. I'm trying golden seal this year. That has to be in the shade. So I've got that planted up under a nectarine tree because otherwise it's just going to fry. It's not going to do it. Okay? Do you guys know Codonopsis pistulosa? Poor man's ginseng. Great Chinese medicinal. Highly revered herb, highly recommend growing that. Beautiful vine, it's a really good one.
Please say it again.
Codenopsis.
Is it called wild ginger?
No, it's poor man's ginseng.
Oh, ginger.
Otherwise, you just call it Codenopsis. A lot of the medicinals actually go by just Trichosanthes. Do you guys know that one? Curiola. That one is snake gourd. It's in the Cucurbitaceae family, same as cucumbers and squash. And that's a very potent Chinese medicinal.
Shrub. Tree.
It's a vine.
Oh.
Yep, it's an annual vine. It's actually a perennial vine, but in our climate it won't overwinter, but it'll produce gourds. Produces these giant gourds, snake gourds they're called. And the gourd and the root are both medicinal parts of that. Do you know Platycodon grandiflora? You guys know that one? Balloon flower. That's another great Chinese medicinal, but all of these, again, can be applied to, Western herbal medicine. That's another perennial. I'm getting off subject, as I like to do. So back to trees, we've got linden. Ginkgo is another great one. You guys know what ginkgo is good for?
Brain.
That's correct. Memory. And ginkgo is the oldest living species of deciduous tree on the planet, right? And it's all about memory. So that's a good one, right? So hawthorns can form trees, more of an understory tree. Elders form trees too, and as an understory tree, they'll get up to about 25 feet. Black walnut is another great medicinal herb tree to cultivate in this climate. Being careful with that one because it puts out a toxin in its roots, which inhibits growth of other plants underneath of it. So you want to make space for that one. But the green hulls, the black walnut, are about the most powerful anti-worm parasite thing you can take, along with Artemisia absinthium. Do you guys know that one? Wormwood? Yeah, which technically is illegal to cultivate or sell. I can't sell it anymore, but if you guys want some, you can come to my nursery. Oh, am I on film? Oh, I didn't say that.
Is the wormwood the same as Sweet Annie?
No, they're both Artemisias, but Sweet Annie is a different plant.
Why is it illegal?
It's a noxious weed. Didn't you know that?
Illegal.
We're gonna spray that with some Roundup. Let's get rid of that thing. No, it's awesome. It's what you make absinthe with. And if your animal has worms, that's the stuff. Yep, that's the stuff. You give it to the goats, will just eat it, right?
Yeah.
You just let them eat it. Yeah, a lot of animals will just eat it because they're smart.
They eat a little bit of it.
Yeah, they don't need a lot. Oh, you wouldn't want to eat a lot. That is some potent medicine right there. And it's related to mugwort, which is also a very potent medicine. And they're all,
It's like eczema and ringworm.
right.
Those fungal.
And in traditional Chinese medicine, it's what you use as a moxa. You use a moxa cone. That's mugwort. You put it on you and you light it on fire and you let it burn down to the skin and then you take it off on different pressure points. So, and that's also related to the tall western sage out here. They're all in the same genus and they're all technically in the composite family, which is the same family as lettuce and daisies and all that stuff. One of the largest plant families there is, okay? So I'm just gonna throw little tidbits at you guys because you just need to surround yourself with botanical information if you're gonna be herbalists and you wanna grow herbal plants. Because remember, you can be an herbalist and not grow any of them. There's actually probably 80% of the people who are herbalists in the world or claim to be herbalists don't even grow the plants. They couldn't even identify them. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. That's one avenue. If you want to grow them yourself, though, it's really good to surround yourself and understand how they are all interrelated with each other, okay? Juniper is also another one that I want to really revere because it's the hedgerow plant. It's potent medicinal. Makes great gin. And it's about the most drought tolerant thing on the planet, and they're great, and they actually grow relatively quickly. So I love the juniper, and there's lots of different kinds of juniper, but the native one here is the one that really produces berries, and that's what you're going for when it comes to juniper. Okay, and willows. There's another one that's really important because the salicylic acid is what they get aspirin from, and that's present in all willow bark. So even the coyote willows and any kind of globe willow or anything like that. Of course, white willow, Salix alba, is the most potent one, okay?
What about aspen?
Aspen is a poplar, but it's not a willow. There are medicinal value to aspen though. That's a good one, you're right. So, and it doesn't thrive at this climate, at this but it is a medicinal. Yep. Okay. So, okay, so you're doing your shrubs, you're getting your hedgerow in, you're creating your nice, nurturing, healthy space that's protected. You've got these pioneer plants in here, and you put your trees in. And then you're gonna come in and you're gonna put your perennials in after that, right? So when you start with your perennials, you've got these perennials, and you're gonna get them, and they're gonna be about this size. They're just little guys, because they're all gonna come in like little 1-gallon pots or 4-inch pots or something. So you're going to put that in the ground, but in about 5 or 6 years, those perennials are going to get huge. You know, they're going to spread and they're going to make more stuff. So what do you do in the meantime? You got this perennial, you got your shrub way over there, you got your tree way over there, and you got all this extra space you're watering. So what are we going to do with that? Any ideas? Propagate annuals, exactly. You're going to plant annuals, right? You must have looked at my notes. Just kidding. You're going to plant annuals, right? So there's all kinds of great annuals that you can plug in there because your echinacea is this big. So you're going to plant a bunch of calendula seed around that because you're watering the echinacea anyway, right? And then the calendula is going to come up and you're going to lose a little bit because during the year the echinacea is going to grow in, but that's okay. They like each other, you know? They're in the same family. They're cousins. They say, oh, hey, what's up? Ain't seen you in a minute, right? How's it going, you know? And the echinacea is going to creep in there a little bit. And then you'll get that calendula on the outside, or you can even pull some of the calendula out if you need to. And then the next year, the echinacea is going to be this big. And you're going to come around and you're going to plant maybe nasturtiums around there or something like that. Or cayenne pepper, okay? Or tulsi, or ashwagandha, which is actually technically a shrub, but we can grow it as an annual in this climate and still get a berry harvest, because that's what you're harvesting on ashwagandha. And you ladies should all know about ashwagandha, right? Lemongrass is another great one. And that one, I don't know if that has a classic medicinal value, but it just makes me happy. So that's medicinal as far as I'm concerned. Spilanthes, you guys know spilanthes, I'm sure, right? You guys all know that one, toothache plant. Milk thistle is another great annual. Blessed thistle. Nicus benedictus. Chamomile is a great another annual that you can grow around your perennials. Datura is a good one to be used cautiously in small doses, but good for asthma, good for lung conditions. Very potent medicine though. Treat with Datura. Yep, Datura. Thorn apple.
It's an annual?
It's an annual. It will perennialize though, definitely. Yep. Tobacco is another good one. Very potent. One of the most potent medicines on the planet. Poppies are another one, right in there with one of the most potent medicines on the planet. You get your opium, you get your morphine there.
Can I ask about tobacco?
Yep.
Around, like, my partner won't let it near his cannabis plants or tomatoes. Is that a thing?
Not cannabis, but tomatoes, yes. But that's probably not, it's unwarranted.
Okay.
Tobacco carries tobacco mosaic virus, which can infect things in the nightshade family, because tobacco's in the nightshade family.
Okay.
Cannabis is not in the nightshade family. But on that note, hemp is a good annual to grow if you want to grow your own CBD. That's another great one to grow around some of your trees or shrubs that you've just planted. Because remember, again, your shrubs are only going to be this big. And so you can plant some hemp around there and then harvest your CBD. And then the next year it's out to here, your shrub's out to there, and you could plant. So hemp gets big, so plant that with your big stuff. Whereas calendula is only going to get this tall, right? So you plant that with some of your smaller things, okay? Basil, great medicinal, carminative, right? Coriander, borage, stevia is one that I love. Do you guys all know what stevia does medicinally? What's it do medicinally? Everybody knows it's sweet, but what's it do medicinally? No one knows what it does medicinally. Okay, here's another great one. It's like the ginkgo. It balances your blood sugar. And it's good for diabetics. So great. Well, thank you, nature. Again, right? You gave us this sweet thing that people who can't eat sugar can eat, and it actually helps them. So Fennel is another great one for the tummy. And clary sage. Do you guys know that one? Salvia scleria. That one is a biennial. You guys know what biennials are, right? 2-year life cycle. Do you know any other biennial medicinals?
Burdock.
Burdock, good job. So what year would you harvest the burdock root? The first or the second year? That's right, the first year. Very good, yeah. Because the second year, there's no life in it. Yeah, it's all shrunken up and gone. So on biennials, if you're harvesting the root, you would harvest the first year, like a carrot. Carrots, if you want to grow seed, you have to harvest the carrot, store it, and plant it back out in the spring and let it go to flower, okay? Making sure that you don't have any Queen Anne's lace around because it'll cross with that, and then you'll get bunk carrot seed, okay? Okay, so you got your perennials, you got your hedgerow, you got your trees going, you put your perennials in, and then you're planting annuals all around there. Boom, you've already got, that's what we call a guild. Okay, there's a guild that's happened there. Gilding is also, I like to say, when you put plants together that have common uses, common themes. Okay, do you guys know elecampane? Inula, helianthus? That is a really powerful immune booster. So I plant that next to my echinacea. So when I go and harvest, they're both root harvests. When I harvest my echinacea, I harvest my elecampane. I make a tincture with them together. They already know each other because they were friends in the garden. They're right next to each other. And so there's no reintroducing them. Their alchemy in the soil and in the air above the soil has already mixed together. So when you make that medicine from them, you're creating something that's more potent than if you had taken it from somewhere else. And elecampane is great. It's super strong, way hardy plant, and it's a beautiful perennial.
How far down does the root go on that?
6 feet. They're huge. Big old honking tap roots. My leaves on mine are already this big. It looks almost like comfrey, but it unfurls differently. And it gets to be about 4 feet, 5 feet tall with yellow flowers in the late summer.
The only way that would have traveled, it seems to have traveled about 10 feet in my garden.
Seed.
Would have been a seed.
Right.
Will those seed well in our climate, or did I do that accidentally?
You might have done it accidentally. They need a little cold stratification. So if they were just laying on the ground, they probably just sprouted. Mine tends to spread a little bit, but nothing like the valerian. That's everywhere. It's all over the garden. The marshmallow, all over the garden, you know, the St. John's wort. Oh, that is a noxious weed, but you guys know St. John's wort, right? Hypericum perforatum. It's choice medicinal. Everybody should be growing. In these depressing times, help lift our spirits. So I grow my St. John's wort with my valerian in the same bed. They know each other. They're happy herbs, right? Valium. We all need Valium. That's where Valium comes from, is valerian, right? And Prozac comes from St. John's wort, you know. And if you want to get really fancy with that, you can grow your hops and your skullcap right next to them too. And then you just go and lay in that bed. You don't even have to take the medicine. Just go lay in it. And believe me, you'll walk out going, God, I feel better. This is just wonderful. And you don't even have to dig. That's the permaculture way, is you don't have to dig the roots. So I like to plant everything in swales or basins. We live in the desert. If we lived on the east side of the big island of Hawaii, we'd be planting everything on mounds because otherwise it would rot, right? So if you're in the tropics or you're in an area where it rains a lot, you keep it so the water sheds more. Well, here we want to catch every little tiny drop of water we can, and we also want to establish our plants as best we can. So we plant everything down in a swale, which is this little guy here, or just a big basin. So when I plant a fruit tree in my garden, I also plant perennials all around the base of them, even if it's a perennial that I think I'm going to tear out and put in something else in the future. And I plant tons of red clover, which is a great medicinal. It's a nitrogen fixer. It's bee food. It helps keep the liver clean. I can't stress enough, we were just talking about this in the greenhouse, liver cleansing. So important. It's second only to the brain in functions that it controls in our body. It regulates our metabolism and so many other things. But it's also our filter. And if we've got a clogged filter, then we can't clean ourselves. So milk thistle is really important, okay? And the burdock is really important too in that way. So we put all that stuff up underneath of our little basin here, and I will go ahead and sometimes I'll plant crimson clover under there. It's an annual nitrogen fixer, and we just shear that thing back when it's flowering, and we just let it lay on the ground and create its own little mulch, all right? So as a permaculture person, we want to garden as little as possible because we want to lay in the hammock and enjoy hanging out and watching the garden grow, because that's really what's fun. Not that I don't mind digging, of course I do, but we want to enjoy the garden and not always be working. So we want the garden to work for us. So to do that, we have to identify what the archetype that each plant plays, and we have to bring them in and let them do the work. Just like when we bring animals into our garden to let them do the work. We want somebody to dig all the grass out, we get a pig and we let him do that because that's what pigs do. So we just let him be a pig. So the same with our plants. With comfrey, we let it be the dynamic accumulator that it wants to be, okay? So dynamic accumulators are plants that have big tap roots and they go deep into the soil and they bring up certain types of nutrients and store them in the leaves, and then they drop back to the ground, and then they actually fertilize our garden just by being themselves, all right? So you've got things like equisetum is one. It stores up silica. You've got dandelions, stores up tons of potassium. You've got comfrey and nettles that store up iron. And so you use these things either in your compost pile or just throw them right there on the ground. And I just throw mine in the paths, and then they actually just compost and feed the soil and put those nutrients right back in, okay? So there's a few other little plants that I thought that I would just throw out here for you guys. Astragalus. You guys know astragalus? Membranaceous. That's really potent Chinese medicinal also, but it has a real crossover into Western herbal medicine. Another nitrogen fixer. And all of those pea family legumes are big bee plants. The bees love them. So you, on a non-windy day, you would see that Siberian pea shrub just covered in pollinators.
Is astragalus an annual?
Perennial.
Perennial?
Yep, sure is, yep. Comfrey and nettle, we already talked about. Does everyone here have nettles growing?
No,
Please?
that's my goal.
Ask Pat for some because
She'll give you some. I have some.
Oh,
Yep,
Right.
and they also grow wild all over the place. There's tons in the West Elks. I've seen them on Saw Pit Road going up to Hastings Mesa outside of Placerville on the way to Telluride. They're all over the side of the road there, if you don't mind harvesting off the side of the road.
I know there's a nice amount on Lambourne that
Mhm.
I found, but I need them
Mm-hmm.
out the back door.
Yeah, right. I feel
Yeah.
you. That's why you plant them in your garden.
That's right. They need their spot, yeah.
And if you're really savvy, you can actually harvest nettles for months. So you start down low here because nettles are more of a spring herb. They come up early. They should probably, most people's are starting to set seed or flower already, which are basically insignificant, and then they kind of wane, you know, they don't like the heat. So you start down here, and then in a month you go up a little higher and find some up there, and then in another month you go up a little higher, and then you go up on the anthracite and go harvest them in the middle of July when it's hot and they're just popping off up there, you know. So those are really good to eat fresh or make tea. You can dry them, whatever, okay? Pleurisy root, do you guys know that one? Pleurisy root, Asclepias tuberosa, which is a milkweed. So that's a really good one and super important because it's the monarch butterfly, of course.
Oh, with the big pods.
No, that's the speciosa.
Okay.
It's a different type. But that's also Asclepias. Asclepias is like there's probably 100 different species of the Asclepias genus, and so the tuberosa is the pleurisy root, and it gets cool orange flowers on it. It's a challenge to grow. It's another one. You have to cold stratify. Do you guys know what that is? Cold stratification? where you have to assimilate the winter conditions for seeds in order to get them to germinate. Because a lot of perennials won't germinate unless they think they've gone through winter time. So you fool them into thinking they went through winter by sticking them in the freezer for a month to sometimes 3 months, and then they actually will sprout. But before that, you could sit there for months and they'll never sprout. Echinacea is like that. The purpurea only needs about 2 weeks of stratification, but the angustifolia needs about a month to 2 months of stratification before it'll even break dormancy. Okay. There's about 15 different species of echinacea, and they all have medicinal value. Of course, the angustifolia is what we know as the most potent. The purpurea is the most used, though, because it's the easiest to grow. It's purple coneflower. You see it all over town in the summer. It's beautiful. The angustifolia is really nice, and I would encourage everybody to grow that. The echinaceas, most of them except for the purpurea, are close to endangered, if not endangered species. They're plains plants that have been lost to agriculture in Kansas. The Tennesseeensis is endangered. That's a really nice one. So the angustifolia, ironically, it's the hardest one to grow. It seems like the weakest one when it's growing, but it's the most potent medicine. And I have that one growing, and I give it a little shade. I give it a little bit of love. It's right on the path, so I can look at it every day and make sure it knows I want it there, because otherwise it would be like, yeah, whatever. You know, these plants, some of these plants really need us now, you know, and not to soapbox about it, but golden seal, ginseng, echinaceas, they're being destroyed in OSHA, over harvested. You know, and especially now, things like OSHA, it's going to be a real challenge to keep that in the wild because it's a lung herb. And with this pandemic, people are freaking out about lungs, and we have to find analogs to these herbs and cultivate them, I think, or we'll lose them because they'll be over harvested. Golden seal's almost gone in the wild because it's over harvested. In the 90s, golden seal was the rage. Everybody wanted golden seal. Now you can't find it. So I just want to give you a few, one place that I would highly recommend you check into if you don't know it is Strictly Medicinals in Williams, Oregon. Richo Chek is the guy who is the herbalist there. They have the largest selection of herbal medicine available that I've ever seen, of plants, seeds, and just the herbs themselves and tinctures. And they grow a lot of the stuff themselves. I buy a lot of plants from those guys. I just got golden seal from them. So we're going to try that one because my forest garden is finally shady enough that I can actually grow it, right? Because you can only grow it in a really full shade environment, right? Do you guys know rhodiola? That's another good one to grow around here. Not easy to grow. It takes months of stratification to get to germinate. And even when it does, you've got to baby it along. Do you guys know what that one's good for? Nope, it's an adaptogen. Once again, another one that tells us what it is. It grows in the Arctic Circle, high altitudes, and it's for altitude sickness. People who come from sea level up to this, you take rhodiola and it helps you to adapt. It helps you through stressful times. It's kind of like a rescue remedy kind of thing, right? So that's a nice one. Wood betony, do you guys know that one? Stachys officinalis. That's a really beautiful one, relatively easy to grow. I started a bunch from seed. I'll probably have some available in August if you guys would like to buy some of those. They're really beautiful plants. I told you about the Codenopsis already, which I think everyone should grow. Prunella, do you guys know that one? Self-heal, Prunella vulgaris. That's a native here, grows up in the woods. In the same environment, you see cleavers. You guys know cleavers and sweet woodruff. That's the Gallium genus. Those are all really good ones. I'm just throwing some stuff out for you guys. I'm not going to sit here and tell you what they all do because that's what herbalists do. I'm just a cultivator. So I'll tell you what can grow here. Foxglove, Digitalis purpurea. You guys know that one? That's another shade lover, okay? Along with your cohoshes. As ladies, I'm sure you guys all know the cohoshes, the sisters, blue and black. And of course, angelica, right? And then there's also the Oregon grape holly is another great shade one. And there's a Colorado creeping holly as well. They're both Mahonia. The small one is repens and the shrub type is aquifolium. They're strung with berberin in their roots. They've got yellow roots. You can use them as a dye plant also, but they're also really good for your liver. A lot of good liver plants out there. So check those out. So if you have a nice shady spot, you can play around with that.